I closed my eyes. Family photo albums, the ones I had spent years arranging by hand, every vacation, every Christmas, every birthday candle our children had ever blown out. He hadn't taken them because he loved the memories. He had taken them because he didn't think I would notice. Or worse, he hadn't thought about me at all. I'll bring them back. Claire sounded desperate. I don't want anything that belongs to you. It's all right. No. Her voice became firm for the first time. It isn't. I didn't know. I swear to you, Eleanor. Hearing my first name instead of Mrs. Hayes felt oddly human. For a brief moment. We weren't two women connected by betrayal. We were simply two strangers trying to understand the same disaster. She asked if she could come by. Every instinct told me to say no. Who willingly invites the woman her husband left her for into her home? No one. At least, no one sane. But another part of me was curious. Not about Claire, about Thomas. If two women had spent years believing completely different versions of the same man, maybe putting those versions together would finally reveal who he really was. Come this afternoon. I spent the next 3 hours cleaning, not because the house was dirty, because I didn't know what else to do. Grief makes people do strange things. Some cry, some scream, some organize kitchen drawers. I polished furniture that didn't need polishing, folded blankets already folded, watered plants that had been watered the day before, anything to keep my hands busy, anything to stop imagining the face of the woman who had unknowingly stepped into my life. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I stood frozen in my hallway. My hand rested on the doorknob for several seconds before I finally opened it. Claire wasn't what I expected. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to steal another woman's husband. She looked exhausted. Her blonde hair was tied into a messy ponytail. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She wore one of Thomas's oversized grey sweatshirts. The sight of it punched the air from my lungs. I had bought him that sweatshirt on our anniversary 6 years earlier. I'm so sorry. Those were the first words she spoke. Not hello, not thank you, just I'm so sorry. Behind her sat 6 cardboard boxes in the back of a small SUV. She glanced toward them. I brought everything. Neither of us knew whether to hug, shake hands, or simply stand there. So we stood there, awkwardly, like two people waiting for someone else to tell them what came next. Finally, I stepped aside. You should come in. She looked around my living room the moment she entered. Family photographs covered the walls. Thomas holding newborn Rebecca. Thomas teaching Michael to ride a bicycle. Thomas laughing at a beach neither of us could afford to visit twice. Claire stared at every picture as though she were reading chapters of a book she'd never known existed. He told me... She stopped. What? He said he never had children. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain couldn't process anything else. Rebecca had just called the night before, asking whether I wanted to babysit the grandchildren next weekend. Thomas had 6 grandchildren. He carried their photographs inside his wallet. Or at least, I thought he did. Apparently, he had been carrying different stories instead. Claire slowly sat on the edge of the sofa. I don't understand. Neither did I. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small photograph. I found this inside his wallet after he left. She handed it to me. It wasn't our family. It wasn't her. It was an old picture of Thomas standing beside another woman. Young, beautiful, dark-haired. Neither of us recognized her. On the back, one sentence had been written in faded blue ink. Forever wasn't long enough. I felt the hairs rise on my arms. Who is she? Claire whispered. I looked at the photograph again. For the first time since Thomas left, I had a terrifying realization. Maybe neither of us had been the only woman. Maybe we weren't even the first. I looked up at Claire. She looked just as frightened as I felt. Whatever story Thomas had been telling us, it was beginning to unravel. And somehow, I knew the truth was going to be far more painful than either of us imagined. For a long time, neither of us said a word. The old photograph rested between us on the coffee table like it had been waiting years to be discovered. I picked it up again. The edges were worn, the colours faded with age. Whoever had carried it had opened and closed it hundreds of times. Thomas had kept it, not in a drawer, not in an attic, in his wallet, close enough to touch every single day. I traced the woman's face with my eyes. She couldn't have been older than 25. Dark curls, bright smile. The kind of smile people wear before life teaches them that forever isn't guaranteed. I've never seen her before, I whispered. Claire shook her head. Neither have I. Then something strange happened. Instead of feeling jealous, I felt afraid. If Thomas had hidden another woman from me, and hidden me from Claire, then who exactly had my husband been? For almost 40 years, I had believed marriage meant knowing another person completely. Suddenly, I wasn't even sure I knew his favourite colour. Claire reached into one of the boxes she'd brought. There are more things. She carefully lifted out several photo albums and placed them on my dining table. I didn't look through everything. Then she hesitated. I wasn't sure if I should. I appreciated that. Some boundaries survive even betrayal. The first album was labelled 1989, our trip to Maine. I remembered every photograph before I turned the page. Thomas pretending to catch a lobster with his bare hands. Rebecca asleep on my lap during the drive home. Michael covered in sand after insisting he could build the biggest castle in America. For a moment, the memories almost made me smile. Then something caught Claire's attention. Can I ask you something? Of course. She pointed to a picture of Thomas standing beside our old station wagon. What month was this? I frowned. July. Are you sure? Very. It was Rebecca's summer vacation. Claire looked down. He told me. She swallowed hard. He spent every July in Colorado hiking alone. We both stared at the photograph. Neither of us needed to say it. He hadn't been hiking. He'd been making family memories with us, which meant, at some point, he had rewritten those memories and handed them to someone else, as if they belonged to another version of himself. Why would someone lie about happy memories? Claire asked quietly. I had spent 19 sleepless nights asking myself that exact question. Finally, I had an answer. Because if he admitted those memories existed, he'd have to admit the people in them still mattered. Claire lowered her eyes. She looked around the living room again. I used to wonder why he never invited me here. I almost laughed. He told me the house had already been sold. I looked around at the home we'd built together. The oak bookshelf Thomas had spent 3 weekends assembling. The grandfather clock we'd saved for almost a year to buy. The little dent in the hallway where Michael crashed his bicycle at 12 years old. Sold? No. He hadn't wanted her to see evidence that another life already existed. Did he ever talk about your children? Claire asked. I smiled sadly. Every day. She looked surprised. He did? He bragged about Rebecca becoming a teacher. He cried when Michael graduated college. He never missed a birthday. Then I stopped. At least. He never missed them physically, emotionally. Maybe he'd already begun leaving long before he packed his suitcase. Claire reached into her purse again. This is why I came. She handed me a folded piece of paper. I found it inside one of the boxes. I unfolded it carefully. At first, it looked like a grocery list: milk, coffee filters, light bulbs, garden fertilizer. Then I noticed the handwriting at the bottom. It wasn't Thomas's. It was mine, my own handwriting. Underneath the shopping list I'd written, "Remember to surprise Thomas with the watch he's been admiring. Don't tell him." I remembered writing it. I'd slipped the note into my purse months ago. Apparently, Thomas had taken it without realizing, or perhaps he had kept it on purpose. The realization hit me like ice water. While he had already been planning his new life, I had been secretly saving money to buy him the retirement watch he'd always wanted. Every week, I tucked away $20 from the grocery budget, sometimes 10, sometimes 5, little by little. It took me almost 18 months. On the morning he left, the watch was hidden inside the hall closet, wrapped, ready, waiting for the retirement celebration I'd spent a year planning. He never opened it. Claire's eyes filled with tears. He never told me that. Of course he didn't. Because men leaving marriages rarely tell the next woman about the love they are abandoning. They tell stories about what they're escaping, not what they're destroying. For the first time, Claire looked angry. Not at me. At him. "He told me you stopped loving him years ago." I couldn't help smiling sadly. "I knitted him a scarf last winter because he kept complaining his neck got cold." Claire stared. "He wore that scarf every day." "I know." "I thought—" She stopped speaking. "You thought you made it?" She nodded slowly. The room became unbearably quiet. Every object suddenly carried two stories, from a different woman, different names, different years. Some ended after 2 messages, some lasted months. One had continued for almost 3 years. Claire looked sick. I wasn't special. I shook my head. No. Neither of us had been. Over the next week, Claire came by almost every day, not because we had become friends overnight, because we were both trying to understand how the same man had rewritten 2 different lives. Sometimes we'd drink tea, sometimes we'd sit without speaking. One afternoon, she suddenly asked, "What were you planning to do after Thomas retired?" I smiled. "We were going to drive across the country. I wanted to see every lighthouse on the East Coast." She covered her mouth. "Oh my God." "What?" "He promised me we'd spend this summer driving across the country." I laughed, not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I would cry. He had recycled dreams the way other people recycled grocery bags. Nothing about him had been original anymore. Rebecca stopped by one afternoon. She looked surprised to see Claire. The room became painfully awkward. I expected anger. Instead, Rebecca walked over and hugged the woman she'd once blamed for destroying our family. Claire immediately burst into tears. "I'm sorry." Rebecca softly replied, "I think my father destroyed both of you." That evening, for the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel empty. It felt honest. Nearly a year passed. Thomas called several times. I never answered. He emailed. I never replied. Then one rainy October afternoon, there was a knock at my front door. I already knew who it was. People who regret their choices always knock differently, slower, less confident, older. Thomas looked nothing like the man who had walked away. His hair had thinned. His shoulders sagged. His expensive confidence had disappeared. "I just want to talk." I stood in the doorway. "So talk." I made the biggest mistake of my life. I believed him. I thought I was looking for happiness. He looked toward the family photograph still hanging inside. I didn't realize I had already been living with it. For years, I had imagined this moment, the apology, the regret, the satisfaction. Instead, I felt almost nothing, because healing has a strange side effect. Eventually, the person who broke your heart becomes just another chapter in your life, not the whole book. I forgive you. His eyes filled with hope. But forgiveness, I continued, doesn't mean I want you back. That hope disappeared, quietly, just like mine had all those months ago, almost 2 years later. My phone rang. It was Claire. This time, she wasn't crying. I got married. I smiled. Tell me about him. He makes his own coffee. I laughed harder than I had in years. He folds his own laundry. We both laughed. And every morning, he thanks me for breakfast. After we hung up, I walked into my garden. The roses were blooming again. I thought about the woman I'd once imagined as my enemy. Life had made us strangers. One man's lies had made us victims. But choosing kindness instead of hatred had made us both free. If there's one thing I learned after 39 years of marriage, it's this. The greatest revenge isn't watching someone regret losing you. It's reaching a place where their regret no longer matters. Because by the time Thomas finally understood my worth, I had already remembered it myself. And that was the beginning of the happiest chapter of my life.